Alright, welcome back. Let's create a block component to render the full block, and more than the block hash within our application. So we're going to start with a new block.js file within the components directory. So note that we have a block.js file, a regular block, and one for blocks.js. So blocks.js is going to be the immediate parent of block.js, which will be the component that creates the actual structure for each individual block. We're going to start by importing React and the component class as usual for a component from the React directory. Then we're going to create a block class that extends this component class. And let's be diligent and export by default this block right away. Cool. We'll then provide the necessary render method. And now the question at hand is, well, how is this block going to get the data for the block to display? We'll have to make another request to the blocks endpoint. Well, we're already making this request in the blocks component, so it wouldn't really seem efficient to have to make this request again and not be able to utilize this data. Luckily, React gives us a way to share data between components, specifically when two components are in a parent-to-child relationship, meaning when this block component is going to be rendered within this overall blocks component, we now have a parent component from the blocks component being the parent of the child block component. And when this happens, the parent can pass data to the child through a structure called props, short for properties. So let's go back to the block.js code. In this case, this block component is going to receive its blocks data through props. So we can access the block using this .props.block. So thanks to the blocks component, which already has all the blocks code, it's going to pass down this information into our overall block component. Now the relevant fields within a block itself that we want to display are the timestamp, the hash, and the data. So let's grab those using the ES6 destructuring syntax from this .props.block. So in JavaScript, we can make local constants based off the keys in this object, such as timestamp, hash, and data, for this overall render method. Now, the hash of the block is quite long, so let's make an alternative constant called hash display. And what this will do is this will be a substring of the overall hash. So let's do hash.substring. Let's make it go from the first character, so 0, to the 15th character. And instead of just taking a hash display that is a substring and rendering that, let's make sure that the user knows that this is only a substring of the overall hash by turning this into a template string, so have backticks, and then render this within $ curly braces, and then add an ellipsis, so 3 dots. So that way they know it's a shortened version of its original form. Cool. The other thing to display is the data, but the data is going to be an object or an array, and we can't render that directly within JSX. So instead, let's get its stringified form called stringified data. Let's call JSON.stringify to get the stringified form that we can actually render as text within the UI for the block. Cool. Now, the stringified data can be quite long as well, so we have the same problem as the hash. Therefore, let's make a data display constant that initially is going to be the result of doing the same template string that is a substring of the stringified data. So that way we can show a shortened version of the stringified data through a data display when it's quite long. However, we don't really want to do this for the data display every time, since it's not going to be guaranteed that it's such a long string, especially for the hash block. So let's check that the stringified data.length is greater than 15, and if so, well, we're going to make it the stringified form. Otherwise, we're going to still use the stringified data. So this template string syntax allows us to have a one-line if expression to conditionally set a variable. Now 15 is rather short for the data, so let's bump this up to 35 in both the length check and the substring as well. And now this gives us all the ingredients that we need in order to render the block. So let's return an overall piece of JSX. This is going to be a div And overall, the class name is going to be block. We're going to add some styling later. First up, within here, let's provide our own div for a hash label that renders the hash display. So recall in JSX, we render some text or variables dynamically through a pair of curly braces. Next, we have the timestamp in its own div as well. And let's have a timestamp label. And this timestamp is going to come in the form of a JavaScript date. Now we want this to look readable for the user. So let's put this within a new date instance. So there's this native JavaScript date class. And what we can do is get the toLocale string version. So that way it looks nice for the user when it's actually used in the application. Finally, we have the very last one, which is the data for the block. Let's have a data label. And then this is going to render whatever we use as the data display, whether it's the stringified 35 substring or the stringified data itself, because it's not that long anyway. Cool. So once we have this entire block component, make sure you have all the changes. One thing I am noticing though is, what is stingified data? Now stingified data does sound something that kind of feels painful. Why would you want anything stingified? Or it actually does sound kind of cool at the same time. But anyways, the actual data reference is stringified data, so that is a small typo that I have. But once you have all the relevant changes, head to blocks.js, and now we can import the block class from the local block file. All right, nice. And now rather than this overall div, we're going to render the block JSX. And this can be a self-enclosing tag, but it still needs this key of block hash to avoid that React error where subsequent blocks of code and JSX generated by an array needs a unique key attribute. The most important part is that we need to provide this block attribute, and this is going to be the block property that we're passing down to the block component itself, so that way it can render its data. So each one of these blocks comes from iterating over this block's map. All right, cool. So that is the new JSX for the overall blocks.js component. With that change in, make sure the application is still running. And once you have it ready, go ahead and check it out in the browser. So go ahead and give it a refresh. And then there it is, there's the wallet info. And then all the blocks fields are now more fleshed out. They all have hashes, cool timestamps, as well as data fields. Nice. Now, one thing about this is that it would be nice to expand this data. Right now, we know it's a shortened version of the string, but it's a shame we can't really explore this further. So we're going to implement that next. And that actually gets us to the cryptocurrency portion of the front end. We're going to do a lot more features to make this front end interactive when it comes to the cryptocurrency, such as visualizing this transaction data to start, and then conducting transactions right from the front end. Also viewing the transaction pool, also mining the transactions from the front end too. So there's a lot to move on to. All right, let's get to it.